Hey gamers, we're back with another episode of Let's Create a Competitive Card Game. In this episode, I'll be coming up with the action system. So let's get started. Alright, last episode we came up with the turn structure, and the idea behind the turn structure in this game is we wanted it to be as free-flowing as possible. Now, many card games out there have games with very strict phases, and specific things have to be done in specific phases. So let's use Yu-Gi-Oh! For example. There's a standby phase, a main phase 1, a battle phase, a main phase 2, and an end phase. And in Yu-Gi-Oh! Combat can only be done in the battle phase, and certain spell cards can only be used in, say, the standby, main phase 2, and sometimes the end phase. So with this game, there are three phases: a start phase, a turn phase, and an end phase. And the start phase is really the turn setup phase. And the very first thing that happens in the start phase is that all damage from the previous turn is removed. And after that, you can draw a card, gain an ability point, so a skill or talent point, and you can use any effects that trigger at the start of your turn. Now, for this game, you can do those in any order you want. So say you draw a card and then you gain your skill or ability point, and then you use your triggers, or you can use your triggers followed by gaining a skill or ability point or drawing a card. So really you can do those in any order you want. Now the turn phase is different from most card games. So in the turn phase, you can play as many cards as you want. As long as you have the resources to play those cards, you can use as many effects as you want, and you can conduct as many battles as you want. And you can do all those actions as many times as you want and in any order you want. So for instance, you can start your turn phase by conducting a battle, then playing a few cards, conducting another battle, using some effects, or you could use some effects, conduct a battle, use some more effects, play some more cards. So really, in the turn phase, it's really up to the player how they want to play out their turn. Now the last phase is the end phase, and the only thing that a player can do in their end phase is choose the order in which any triggers that occur at the end of the turn happen. That is the only thing that a player can do in their end phase. So you can't activate new effects and abilities unless you are responding to your triggers. And also for the end phase, your opponent can't respond to your end phase. So that is the turn structure within this game. And for this episode, I wanted to come up with the action system. So let's go ahead and make a section for this. And that is what I will call it for now. I'm not sure if I will rename it or not. So the action system in this game is what some games may call a chain, a stack, a chase, whatever. It is the response system that other games use. Now, I've played a lot of card games, so Yu-Gi-Oh!, Force of Will, Magic, Pokemon, the Spoilers versus System, etc. And a lot of games have the same response system, and some games have a unique response system. Now, let's start with Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Has perhaps the most unique response system, and they call it a chain. And the way Yu-Gi-Oh! Works is whenever you play a card, your opponent can respond to you playing that card. And if your opponent doesn't want to respond to you playing the card, you, the player, has an option to respond to your own card by playing another card, and so forth and so forth. So Yu-Gi-Oh! Is pretty simple. Now they do have the idea of things like spell speeds, where once a certain spell speed gets played, then no other lower spell speed can be played as a response. So other than that, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is very simple. Now Magic's chain system, or rather their version of a response system, is very in-depth and robust. So in Magic, they have an idea of something called priority. So typically the turn player has priority, and during their priority, they can play and respond to as many of their own cards as they want, and then they pass priority to the opponent who can now play and respond to as many of their cards as they want. And the way the stack works in Magic, it's just like programming. It's the first in is the last out. So the last thing plays gets its effect first. And for Magic, if there are 10 things on a stack and the 10th thing resolves, then the player can now put a new card on the stack responding to any of the other cards on the stack, and then the opponent can also do the same thing when priority is passed to them. So Magic's stack is it's very robust. Now, Force of Will has a chase system that is very similar to Magic stack, so I won't really go into detail on Force of Will's response system. I will, however, go into detail with the Spoils response system, as that is a little bit different from Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Force of Will. So the way the Spoils works is there are certain things that a player can respond to, or there are certain points in the game where a player gets priority or initiative. And similarly to how it is in Magic, you can respond to your cards if you want, but the other player does get an option to respond to your cards as well. And one thing unique about the Spoils is, for instance, during the battle phase in the Spoils, after you declare battle, one player, say player 1, has the option to use tactics and abilities, and for that time they have priority and they can keep responding and using their cards as much as they want, and then they can give the opponent a chance to respond. And I shouldn't really say as much as they want, as whenever you play a card in the Spoils, your opponent does have a chance to respond. It's just that you have priority, so you can keep playing your cards. Now, once your response phase is done, then it's your opponent's response phase, and they can play as many things as they want and keep responding. And of course, you can respond. But for instance, in the Spoils, if you play a card, once that card is finished being played and its effect goes off, you still have priority, so you can now play a new card, and now its effect, when it goes off, you can keep doing that. So it is a little bit different from, say, Magic, Force of Will, and Yu-Gi-Oh! So for this game, I want something fairly simple and maybe a little bit similar to Yu-Gi-Oh! So what I want to do is say that in this game there are certain game actions that occur, and whenever a game action occurs, a player has a chance to respond to that game action. And if a player or if the opponent doesn't respond to that game action, then the turn player can respond to their own game action. So something a little similar to Yu-Gi-Oh!, but it will be a little bit different. So let's just go ahead and say, let's say the action system is similar to, let's say, chains and stacks in other games. And what I'll say is, whenever an opponent performs a game action, you may respond to that game action. Now, how can you respond to that game action? So I'll say you can respond by, say, using an effect or by playing a skill. And I'll capitalize this as I mean skill card. So for this game, the way you respond is you can use one of the cards in play effects, or you can play a skill card. And let's say if you choose not to respond, your opponent may respond to their game action by also using an effect or playing a skill. So yeah, let's say exactly that. You choose not to respond to their game action. Let's say by playing a skill or by using an effect, or let's keep it the same as before, to their game action by using an effect. And let's also say that the turn player may respond to their game actions with talent cards as well. So now talent cards become very useful on your own turn. Alright, so what else? Let's say the obvious. When a series of responses are made, the responses resolve in reverse order. So it is what you call in programming a stack. And it will not be called a stack in this game since it is a stacking magic, so I will not be calling it a stack. And eventually there will be a comprehensive rulebook that further explains the action system. So now the question now becomes, what are these game actions? So let me add some space. So let's just say game actions. So for now, we'll say that game actions include, say, playing a card. Let's say using an effect. And by effect, I mean also ability. So for this game, I'll have to decide if I'm calling card effects, or abilities. Let's say drawing a card or cards. And let's be specific and say outside of the start phase, not to include the start phase. And let's say, what else can we say? Let's say assigning damage, as I do think that it is an interesting time to be able to respond. And let's also say ending a turn. And yeah, so some of these will need to be play tested just so I can flesh some of this out. But yeah, so this is the idea of the action system. So whenever your opponent plays a card, uses an effect, draws a card, assigns damage, or ends their turn, then you can respond to that. And as a player, whenever you play a card, use an effect or ability, draw a card outside of the start phase, or assign damage, then you have a chance to respond as well if your opponent chooses not to respond. So yeah, that will be all for this episode. Again, I really want to keep these videos between 15 and 20 minutes. So be sure to like, subscribe, and all of that other good stuff. Thanks.